Research organization Africa Check says government's claims that over 4 million houses have been provided to the poor is misleading. Africa Check says during the debate on the State of the Nation address, Housing Minister Mmamoloko Kubayi said of the 10.6 million additional households now living in formal dwellings, 4.8 million were provided by government. And Africa Check's Keegan Leech joins me to discuss more about this. Keegan, I just want to set the scene for why we're doing this particular conversation, that it's in fact going to be the lead up to a series of conversations that fact-check promises or claims made by politicians. It's really important in the lead up to elections. What they say to their audiences, to their prospective voters, will have some influence on how things eventually stack up. And it's important that in the public interest, as much information and fact-checking is done to allow them to make those decisions. So that's just to share a little bit on the context. So, Keegan, let's go back to the issue we're discussing today. And there's a history, it would seem, in the ANC of making a similar claim, which you've also had a look at. So maybe let's just start there, of what you found in that regard.
Yeah, well, as you say, this claim has a history. It's not always exactly the same number, but we have debunked it over and over again because politicians, when talking about housing provided by the South African government, tend to make the same mistake again and again. And that mistake is confusing houses, like a physical structure that has been built, with what are called housing opportunities, which encompasses a broad range of things, which includes houses, but also all sorts of other things like serviced stands, which are empty plots that have just been connected to utilities.
All right, I think let's go into that piece a little bit more and tease them out. And for anyone who is interested, they can always go back to Africa Check. I think you've mapped this between 2014 and 2019, and then the latest claim in the latest SONA, the history of those numbers and what was said. This difference between a housing opportunity and a house, let's talk about how that is defined.
Well, a housing opportunity is essentially any kind of housing support provided by the government. That includes subsidies, it includes, like I said, serviced sites, and it does include what used to be called RDP and are now BNG, or breaking new ground houses, which are actually physically built structures. But very often a politician will say something like the government has provided 4.8 million houses instead of 4.8 million housing opportunities. And the difference there is quite large. According to the DHS, the actual number of houses that's been provided is just over 2 million.
Wow, so quite a disparity there. And I think it's important that when we talk about things, we're able to define that. As you say, when they talk about housing, it could encompass a number of different things, whereas in the public's mind, the concept of a house might be, something that at least has 4 walls, has a foundation, has a roof, and is habitable. So the languaging there, very, very important. So that's one layer of complexity. And then, Keegan, there is another. One person could receive multiple housing opportunities. How does that factor into how we understand the claim?
Well, when we say, 2 million people have received houses, and those are 2 million out of 4.8 million that have received housing opportunities, that isn't actually 4.8 million people. That's 4.8 million housing opportunities provided. One individual beneficiary might have received multiple housing opportunities. So the example the DHS gave us is that someone might receive a serviced stand, and then the government might later build a house on that serviced stand. And it would count those as 2 different housing opportunities towards that total of 4.8 million. But obviously, there's only one beneficiary there and only one house at the end of it all.
So I know that when you, as Africa Check, make some determinations, you would say, the claim made is either verified or unverified, unclear or a lie completely. Where does this fall? Where does this claim fall?
We've described this as misleading because there is data to back this up. The DHS has got a record of 4.8 million housing opportunities provided. The issue is that politicians are not being clear when they express this. And they, more than anyone else, should be able to check the exact numbers and distinguish between what is, say, a house and what is a housing opportunity, so as to ensure that the public isn't sharing 4.8 million houses and picturing 4.8 million physical structures.
And I guess it's important, again, both in the parliamentary debates, but also amongst the reporting community, to be able to interrogate some of those claims insofar as the definitions are concerned. Because as you say, you could get away with language that is misleading, but once you kind of drill down into the specifics, a very different picture is emerging. And that's quite a stark difference, then, Keegan, between the claim and how it actually lands, isn't it?
Absolutely. And like you say, we also have to be careful when reporting on this, because it's very easy when a politician says something, especially if they say it multiple times, and then it is repeated in the media, especially if it's repeated often, for that then to become what everyone understands and to become the figure that is in everyone's minds. So it's very important to head that off at the pass and, to drill down into it when it's reported on and when it's discussed, to not let sort of the misleading original statement become the only statement.
All right. So you focused on these claims, in terms of their specifics, what it actually means. But there was something she had also said. This is the Housing Minister, Mmamoloko Kubayi, around the question of constitutionality and the rights of people to housing. And it was also something that a lot of people rounded her out on, that when the Constitution says people have a right to shelter, it's not because it says it must be done by the government. She did double down later, saying that it was, she had been quoted out of context and so on. But again, because that is out there, has been, reported on, may not necessarily have the necessary update attached to it, Keegan. How does that stack up against what the Constitution actually asks for?
Well, we didn't actually focus on this, in part because it got a lot of attention and a lot of coverage, and we didn't break down what her defense was for this and, why she claims this is still defensible. But also, we focused on her claims about the number of houses provided, because really that is her area of expertise. Minister Kubayi, as Minister of Housing, should be the one who is responsible for making accurate claims and reporting accurate data about the number of houses provided. There is, although we expect politicians and public figures to have an understanding of what the Constitution says, obviously she's not a constitutional lawyer or an expert or something like that. And we feel that this particular claim, which didn't get as much attention as her claims about the Constitution, really should be something that we should be holding her to account more on, and holding other politicians who've made the claim in the past, like President Ramaphosa, to account on, because it's something that is very directly their responsibility.
All right, Keegan. The Constitution, though, does, call for the state to ensure that there is access and the right to adequate housing. Again, a claim, that would be worth pursuing later, or just a reminder, especially in this 30th year of our democracy, the rights that people have to various basic, services and human rights in South Africa. So thanks very much for talking to us. Keegan Leech is a researcher at Africa Check, and just joining us to talk about this claim that was made by the Housing Minister on the number of houses that were provided. This is very important, especially in an election year. The Minister maintaining that over 4 million houses had been provided to the poor. Keegan breaking down the definition there and why it's really important to interrogate some of the claims that we are hearing. And we'll help our audience with that by all politicians across different parties on what they are claiming and whether it stacks up against real life and the facts.